Sometimes it's really hard to tell your partner what you think because you imagine they're going to be angry, they're not going to want to listen to you, they're going to dismiss you, and you kind of wait and wait and wait to try and build up your confidence, your courage. You try to get to a good place, you try to rehearse, and yet nothing works, and all you do is get more and more and more and more anxious, and then you get stressed out, and you might actually get sick. And that's going to create tensions in the marriage, because instead of communicating and really finding some common ground together, you're creating more divergent pathways to take you away from one another and focus on sickness or duties or practical things rather than what's really going on inside you. So I'm going to tell you the story about how I helped one of my clients address this really difficult issue that he'd been grappling with for a long time in his marriage. I'm going to change the name and call him Richard. And Richard had been married about 5 or 6 years, and he had a couple of kids that were very young. And he loved his wife very much. But he was always scared of coming home after work and talking to her. He would imagine doing it before he got home. He'd have things he'd wanted to share. He wanted to tell her about how much he missed her, about being close to her, about planning things together, about having affection, love, and all the rest of it. But as soon as he opened that door, his heart would sink, his teeth would get gritty, and his muscles would all kind of clench up in his face and in his head and in his chest and his arms, and his throat would kind of dry up, and he couldn't say anything. He was kind of protecting himself from what he imagined he would get in response. And the evening would go by like most other evenings, where they do some small talk about the kids, about, stuff for the next day. But he'd go to bed full of resentment about what he couldn't share, and it would just make him more anxious and tense. He would get stomach cramps, he wouldn't be able to sleep properly, he'd be very edgy and tetchy, and then in the morning, whatever his wife might say to him or approach him about anything, he'd immediately take it as an attack and try to defend himself, because he was still in that place of feeling scared about sharing with her what he really wanted. And time would pass, days and days like this. He'd have more difficulty sleeping, he'd have more cramps, sometimes he'd have very serious backache, he wouldn't be able to go to work, and life became incredibly difficult for him. And then about a couple of months later, after this pattern, all of a sudden he'd be maybe doing some stuff in the kitchen with his wife or playing with the kids, and his wife would come and say something to him completely inane. It could be about grocery shopping, or, going to visit their in-laws or something like that. And all of a sudden, Richard would get his buttons pushed, and he would just spew out all those feelings he'd held in for such a long time, and it would be vitriolic. He couldn't see his wife at the time. He couldn't see anything other than having to get his anger out, his resentment out, his fear out, his anxiety out, and it all had to come out in the rush. He couldn't let her in. He couldn't have a dialogue. So what do you think happened? What do you think his wife did? Well, it was like a bombshell, a cannonball. She couldn't respond. She didn't know how to take it. She didn't know which piece of his huge utterances filled with anxiety and fear and hate and resentment and bitterness. She didn't know what to attend to. So all she could do was withdraw and run away. And then Richard would feel, oh, here we go again. She doesn't want to listen to me. She doesn't want to hear what I'm saying. She doesn't care about me. What's the point? And get more and more angry. So here's what I did with Richard. I would help him see this pattern, and together we noticed that he would build up and build up and build up. He'd sort of be constipated because he couldn't let go. He was so scared, and he wanted to hold on to his anger. He wanted to hold on to his feelings, because if he let it go, it wouldn't be his anymore. It would be giving up his power to her. Once he gave it to her, he didn't know what she was going to do with it. Would she attack back? Would she destroy it? Would she make him feel small? He didn't know. So one part of him kind of wanted to hang on really tight. But then there came a point where he was bursting. He was getting sick. He couldn't sleep. So the next moment when she just triggered him by talking about something totally inane, he then had diarrhea. And it was stinky, it went all over the place, it was embarrassing, it was shameful, and of course she couldn't attend to it because it was all over the place and stinky and it wasn't something you could deal with. So she had to run away. And then the cycle started all over again. And what I helped Richard do was to tune in to the tiniest little feelings he had about something he needed to share with his wife. Maybe it was he missed her. Maybe it was, I wish we could talk about this in a different way. Maybe it was, I need some affection. Maybe it was, let's plan something together. In the tiniest way, and then to kind of rehearse it in his mind so that it became something easy to do. It felt like it was manageable. He could accomplish it. And in those moments, he didn't have to think of her beating him back, not listening, making fun of him or anything else, because they were tiny little things. And in those moments, there was no reason for her not to want to listen and have a dialogue. And it took a lot of time and a lot of patience, but eventually Richard got the courage up to do that. And little by little, he allowed one of his feelings to come out and have a little dialogue. And then another one another time, and another one another time. And these little dialogues helped him to understand that when he got his feelings out and he got some response, it kind of cleared his insides out. He had space. He could take her in, she could take him in. They had space and time for each other. They could enjoy being affectionate in those moments, really trying to tune in and understand each other rather than trying to be dealing with constipated feelings and then diarrhea feelings at the other end, which is very uncomfortable. Nobody likes it, and it doesn't really do anything for the marriage. So if you really want to save your marriage, tune into the tiniest feelings you have and share them as quickly as you can. Because if you build up constipation. And then when you let go, it's stinky diarrhea. You don't like it, your partner doesn't like it. So save your marriage by sharing your tiny little feelings as they come up. Be interested in your partner's response. Don't just think they're going to have a certain reaction and then only look for that. Because in that way, you're not really seeing your partner and you're not going to save your marriage. So be curious about their reaction. Take it in, because as soon as you let your stuff out, you now have room to take in their reaction. You don't only have to go on memories and old stuff, which isn't really true anymore. Tune in, share in the moment, be curious about your partner, let them share, have those little dialogues, digest the moment together. That's the most important thing, together. And then you'll be able to have more of these. You'll be able to communicate in small doses and really take each other in and enjoy the meals that you have together when you communicate and you have a shared experience. It's not about you throwing something at your partner or your partner throwing somebody at you and you either running away because it stinks or it's just too much and you can't handle it, so you have to kind of throw it back. So that's how you can do it little by little, save your marriage, and enjoy the most wonderful connection you can. And now I want you to do me a favor. I want you to write some comments at the bottom of the video about whether this video resonated with you, how you felt about it, have you tried something like this, what were your feelings? What were your feelings as you were listening to me? Do yourself a favor and me at the same time by tuning into those little feelings you've had during the video. Did it remind you of something? Did you want to do it? Did you get excited? Was it bored? Whatever it was, write about that, and then you practice tuning into those little feelings and being curious about yourself rather than holding it in. And then you can do that with your partner too.